With all of that, I am simply going to turn this over to our first speaker, Kevin Vost. I've introduced him a little bit already. Is there anything else very grateful that you came. I have enjoyed your books quite a bit myself. I think all of you are going to enjoy his talk.
All right, and again, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Andy, for setting this up. Thank you all for being here. This is the first time I get to talk to a group of real-life Stoics. I must admit, I wondered what you look like, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. So, and how intriguing that here we are, all excited and passionate about these dour, stiff-lipped, sourpusses in some of the modern conceptions of what Stoics are. But we certainly know better. My day started in a perfect manner fit for a Stoic. I'm at the hotel. I drove up from Springfield, Illinois, and I'm greeted with a flat tire. The first flat tire in all my many years. But Stoics are into relationships. I had good friends, Pat and Christine Flynn, who live in this area. And as Seneca once said, we shouldn't cultivate friends so we'll have somebody to take care of us when we're in need. We should cultivate friends so we can take care of them when they're in need. And they were that kind of friend that took care of me and got me here today. So, my talk is entitled 40 Years on the Porch, Lessons Ancient Stoics Taught a Modern Psychologist. So to condense 40 years in a half an hour or so, I'm going to really have to hit the ground rolling. But I will just give a few highlights, of course, and I think one low light of my experience throughout my life with the Stoics and without them. And then I talk about lessons for a modern psychologist, but it's really broader than that. Epictetus had a big influence in me becoming a psychologist, but also a public speaker. Not necessarily a good one, but a public speaker. And a professor, a college professor. Epictetus played a big role there. I write a lot of books now, and a person who played a big role there was Seneca. And I'll explain in the course of the talk how they did this. But the other great Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Musonius Rufus, have really given me all kinds of benefits throughout my life, throughout the 40 years I've known them, in all kinds of different ways. And I'll highlight a few now as we go through. So let's go back about 40 years. In my late teens, I was obsessed with the love of two things. We could call it mind and body. We could call it wisdom and muscle. We could call it philosophy and bodybuilding, or weightlifting, right? And December 1978, these two came together in the flesh in the person of one man. My friend and I drove to St. Louis, Missouri to see a seminar by a bodybuilder named Mike Mentzer. He had just won the Mr. Universe title, the first man to ever have a perfect score. He was expected to be the heir apparent to Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it kind of didn't really work out that way. But we go to his seminar. We're in our late teens. At the time, I was really embodied what some modern psychologists describe as adolescent thinking patterns. People like the Professor David Elkind talk about these different aspects of adolescent egocentrism infecting our adolescents' thinking. We have these new reasoning powers now, hypothetical, if-then thinking, abstract abilities. And it's like, wow, we're approaching this world in all these new ways. We have these capacities, but we don't yet have the experience and the knowledge base to really rein it in. But at that time, I shared some of those traits, which include things like a sense of invincibility, like nothing's going to harm you because you're special, right? This concept of an imaginary audience some teens have. You feel like everybody's looking about you and you're so self-conscious. You find out later people are usually more focused on themselves to spend too much time worried about you, but have that kind of thing going on. And the most relevant one they call the Personal Fable. The idea that somehow our life is unique. There's never been anybody quite like us who could really understand us. We're special. That leads to that sense of invulnerability. And one way that can manifest itself is if you have a passion, if you're into music or if you're into sports, you'll think someday I'm going to be that guy, up on the stage. If you got a group of like a junior high basketball players, and the kids that are really into it, they're good at it, they love it, and you ask for a show of hands, how many of you are going to play in the NBA someday? You're likely to see a lot of hands, not knowing how selective that NBA group is. And actually, years later, when I did some work for a group that certified personal fitness trainers, I did a little survey of some of their trainers, the ones that were into weightlifting or bodybuilding, and a majority of them did think that they themselves one day would be the actual top guy, Mr. Olympia or the world weightlifting champion, things like that. So I had that. So my buddy and I and a bunch of other young people go to see Mike Mentzer give this seminar. And he's Mr. Universe. We're going there to find out how we can do what he did, so we'll be Mr. Universe. And early in this seminar, he tells us, there's one thing you must do if you're going to become a world-class bodybuilder. And we're like, this is what we came here for. Drink motor oil, no problem. Work out 12 hours a day, we got it. But he says, no, he said, if you want to be the best world-class bodybuilder, he said, you have to choose the right parents. Choose the right, how are we going to do that? You know? How are we going to do that? Weightlifting, training, eating right can do a lot to transform a body for most people. And if you're willing to take steroids, it can make you freakishly big and powerful. But no matter how many steroids you take, no matter how much growth hormone you take once you've reached maturity, you can't change how long your clavicles are, how wide your shoulders are, the structure. You can't change how wide or narrow your hips are to get that classic shape. For each one of the muscles of your body, like your biceps, the two heads of the biceps, they attach from a varying distance to the elbow. And if your biceps attach very, very low, you have the potential to develop massive arms, like in Arnold Schwarzenegger, because the muscle can't get wider or thicker or taller than it is long. And if you look at your own arm, like I have one of the muscles attaches real low, and the other one, there's a gap. It's higher. So I thought, once I listened to Mincer, I realized, well, no, I'm not going to be Mr. Olympia. No, I guess, well, dang. But so there used to be cartoons called Fractured Fairy Tales, and I say that he turned my personal fable into a fractured fairy tale. I'm not going to be the best, okay. But there's a really relevant line here from Epictetus when he talks about Milo, who's considered the father of weightlifting, the guy that lifted the young calf, and then as the calf got bigger, Milo kept lifting it. He kept getting bigger and stronger until he was the best Olympic wrestling champion ever. But Epictetus says, just because I can't be a Milo doesn't mean I won't take care of my body. Just because we can't attain the highest in some field doesn't mean we can't take care of ourselves and try to be the best that we could be. So my lesson for that seminar was, I realized, okay, I got to look at other things in my life besides bodybuilding. My own genetic potential was a little bit better for strength than it was for muscles. So I competed in powerlifting for some years and enjoyed that. But now, years later, as I look back upon this experience in Epictetan Stoic terms, I'm thinking, what did Mincer teach me? That something that I thought was within my control was not nearly as in my control as I thought so. My own body. And in the Handbook of Epictetus, the very first paragraph when he says, some things are up to us, some things are not up to us, or under our control, not under our control, one of the first things he lists is our bodies as something that we don't really have full control over. So I look back at that, he was onto something. So Mincer taught me, I can't really control my body quite to the extent that I thought it could, and that was an important lesson. Now, Mincer also played an important role because I lived and breathed these muscle magazines, Joe Eater's Muscle Builder, Muscle Fitness, and all that. And Mincer wrote his articles, but he was also a bit of an intellectual, and he loved philosophy. So he wrote about Friedrich Nietzsche, Bertrand Russell, Ayn Rand. I read a lot of Ayn Rand through him and after. And because of that, I started haunting these things we used to have. There's still some around, I think, called bookstores, where you can go and see his actual books on the shelves. And I found things like popular works on philosophy. Will Durant's Story of Philosophy, he's a great historian. The Story of Philosophy, his book, The Mansions of Philosophy. It got me so intrigued in it that by the time I went to college, I decided I wanted to be like Greg and Daniel. I wanted to be a philosophy professor. I wanted a PhD in philosophy. But I was so shy and such a homebody that the local community college, the Catholic Junior College, and the State University in my city, none of them had a philosophy major or even a formal minor. And I got really good grades, did well on standardized tests, but I never even thought about leaving town. So what did I do? I thought, well, what's the second best thing? Well, they do have a psychology major. There's a lot of overlap. So I decided to major in psychology and take as many philosophy courses as I could just on the side. But interestingly, it really wasn't in those philosophy classes that I came across the Stoics. It was through my psychology coursework. Now, also at one of those bookstores, I would look at the philosophy, psychology, self-help. I came across a book called A New Guide to Rational Living by Albert Ellis and Robert Harper. Albert Ellis, the founder of Rational Emotive Therapy. And that had such a powerful impact on me that in my junior and senior years when I was zooming in on psychology, I was taking a clinical psych course, and for my research paper, I decided to do it on Ellis's Rational Emotive Therapy. It was the biggest research paper I ever did outside of my thesis and dissertation. I absorbed everything I could on Ellis, read all the books. This is pre-internet, so I go to something called Psychological Abstracts, try to track down the articles, go find them on the shelves, go copy them on the ancient copying machines, paying for each page, But anyway, totally absorbed Ellis, everything. I don't know if people even realize he made rationally emotive songs. Anyone ever come across those? I remember one, he sang it to the tune of Funiculi, Funiculi, And he was making fun of being obsessed even about having perfect rationality. And he goes, I won't sing it, but he says, perfect rationality, that is the only way for me. And stuff like that. So, I got into everything with Ellis. That same term, I had an abnormal psych course. So what did I write about there? Well, depression, but of course, Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy of depression. So I also became absorbed in this other. Ellis was a psychologist, Beck was a psychiatrist. Ellis started this system in the 50s, Beck shortly after in the 60s. And both of them acknowledged one of their primary founding sources was Epictetus. And they got a lot from Epictetus, but the one line that they both zoomed in, or that caught my attention the most, was from the Handbook, the 5th chapter, where Epictetus says, in one translation, people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of things. Okay, and that had both Beck and Ellis, say how much they got out of Epictetus through that idea, and that was mind-blowing for me. It was kind of the opposite of what Menser taught me. Menser taught me something I thought that was in my control really wasn't, and this idea taught me things I didn't realize I could control. My own emotions, my ability to be upset or not, to be shy or not, was actually within my control. Now, if you're familiar with Ellis, he was trained as a clinical psychologist. At his time, through the first half of the 20th century, in psychiatry, Freud and psychoanalysis, those people had the most sway. And part of the idea was, if you're upset now, it's because some trauma you had when you were a child. And another big force in psychology was behaviorism. From Pavlov's dogs to B.F. Skinner's pigeons, stimulus response. We respond because certain things in the outside happen to us. But Ellis said it came to him that, sometimes childhood traumas, they certainly can set us up for disturbance later in life. He said, but if you're disturbed, it's because of what you keep telling yourself today about that trauma that happened in the past. And I love the way he encapsulated Epictetus' idea in what he called the ABC theory of emotions. If some of you come across that, where it's like stimulus and response, but the A is activating event, the C is a consequence. And Ellis says, what the activating event doesn't necessarily produce an emotional consequence. The B, which is the belief, the view, the judgment, makes a difference. And one of the clearest examples Ellis gave was, imagine you're on a crowded bus, and this big, huge man walks past you, stands squarely on your foot, smashes your big toe, walks on by without a word of apology, right? What's going to happen? Your toe's going to hurt. You're probably going to be angry. You're going to be angry. Stimulus response, activating event, consequence. He steps on my toe without an apology. I'm mad. He says, what happens if you look, though, and you realize this guy has very dark glasses and a white cane, right? So he didn't do that on purpose. He was blind. He didn't even know he did it. So he said, your toe would still hurt, but would you still be angry? Well, hopefully you wouldn't. So, part of the basis of some of the techniques in cognitive therapy are to make sure that your judgments of situations, your impressions, are accurate, that they correspond with reality. But it goes beyond that, because Ellis, borrowing from the Stoics, would say, well, what if he meant it? What if it was on purpose? Your toast, do you really have to be angry at him? Do you have to let him ruin your day? And they would say no. No, because we are going to encounter all kinds of injustices in our life, and we can train ourselves to not let other people's actions disturb us, even when they're acting inappropriately. As Epictetus might say, another person, sure, you can do anything you want to my paltry body, but you can't control my soul. You can't control my thoughts and reactions. So that had a very, very profound impact on me. The most dramatic event where I saw the power of this in action, I can tell you about that. Ellis said he remembered the Stoics, the power of the Stoics, because when he was a young man, he wanted to talk to girls, but he was too shy. So he studied the Stoics, and he went in some big park. He approaches all these girls. Most of them rebuff him, but eventually he overcomes that problem and can talk to girls. He realizes this is not such a catastrophe if they reject him. Now, in my teenage years, that wasn't a big problem for me. I went to a Catholic all-boys high school, wasn't around girls too much. I was all focused on my wisdom and muscle. To me, girls were like goddesses on a pedestal, and I wasn't even worthy to approach them until I became Mr. America. Then I would. But the thing that got me, though, was something I couldn't avoid, which was public speaking. Not as an actual public speaker, but like in classes. Often you'd have this darn teacher or professor that would insist at the end of the term you present something. And I, by nature, was extremely shy. I have a ruddy complexion. You can probably see it now. I turn red very easily, especially if I have a collar and a tie choking me. But it was so severe that I remember in high school, just all boys around, I shouldn't have cared. But I could sit there and think, boy, wouldn't it be embarrassing if I turned red right now just sitting here? And sure enough, there was. They're just terrible. Well, I said it was terrible before I knew the rationing motive thought. I thought it was terrible. But I read Methods in Ellis, where he's borrowing from the Stoics, and even in a way from the Cynics. I used two techniques to get me over this. The first is called, sometimes they call it negative visualization, or I've heard Donald Robertson use a Latin term, premeditatio malorum, or preparing in advance for adversity. And here's how I did it, borrowing from Ellis, paraphrasing him for public speaking. He says, imagine you're going to give a talk. You get up there, your voice falters, you stutter, you try to crack a joke and nobody laughs. You realize you've spit on people in the front row, and if I have, my apologies. You look down, you realize your shoes don't match and your fly is open. He said, okay, well, maybe you say, maybe I'm the worst public speaker in the world. But somebody has to be, right? It's okay, it'll be me. I'll go on. So I thought about that. I rehearsed that a lot. But then one other technique. Ellis called them shame-attacking exercises. And people to go out and on purpose do something embarrassing just to show, hey, I can survive this, right? And he would talk about things like, this is in New York City where he was working, go out and walk a banana on a leash like it was a dog. Or just go in an elevator and face back instead of front, things like that. So, and there's actually a story, Greg was talking about Zeno of Citium. There's a story like in Diogenes Laertius' Life of Zeno. Like the second page, he said that he was being taught under Crates, like it's Crates, not Crates and Socrates, Crates and Socrates, right? But yeah, he was studying under Crates, who was a Cynic philosopher, and he realized that Zeno was very easily embarrassed, and he wanted to cure him of that. So he made him walk around the city carrying this big pot of lentil soup. And it said that when he realized that Zeno was embarrassed and tried to hide it, Crates took his staff and smashed it. So the soup went all over his legs, and Zeno ran away, and he said, what are you running away for, you little Phoenician? Nothing terrible has befallen you. So actually the story there in our founder, Zeno, that this technique was used on him. So what did I do? Well, it didn't involve a banana or a pea soup, but I had to give a talk in a psychology class. And I remember it was on Alfred Korzybski's General Semantics, which was another area of thought that Ellis had borrowed from. And before I gave that talk, I just got up in front of it was a small, a fraction of this size of crowd. And I said, I want to apologize in advance if you see me turning red or sweating, if my voice cracks. I said, if you can see my heart pounding beneath my chest. At the time, I was really into bench pressing and wore a tight shirt, so I did that Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. So I made a complete fool of myself, a spectacle of myself. And then I got on with it. And seriously, from that point on, I've really not been nervous giving any public talk, with the exception I almost did 2 weeks ago. And I'll tell you before I finish why that was, but I really did not get that nervous about that one. But it was, I just thought this is amazingly effective, even for me, a person as naturally shy as me, that this could make a real difference in my life. So, moving along, I go through college. Shortly after my bachelor's, I got a job working disability claims for the Social Security Administration, though it was a state job. And in Illinois, I don't know how it is in Wisconsin or your state, but some people said state worker was an oxymoron. They really don't do much work. but I was one for 32 years. But we did. We had a tremendous caseload of mental and physical disability cases. And they kept all kinds of statistics on us. How long it takes us to do each case. How accurate we were, how many quality assurance returns we got. So many people found this very stressful. And sometimes we were held accountable for things that were outside of our control. One simple example. If a person files a disability claim, they have not seen a doctor recently, we are obligated to set them up with an exam to see a doctor. But sometimes they would fail. And you're supposed to go, there's a no-show. So some adjudicators would get totally angry. Well, now my processing time is going to go up. And they call that person and they chew them out, You better attend this next, and why didn't you go, and all this. And I would never do that. I would just calmly call them and try to explain to them, I can give you one more try. So if you can't make it for some good reason next time, you have to call me. Otherwise, I'll have to finish your case without it. So basically, this is up to you, whether you make it or not. You're not going to upset me one way or the other. I didn't say that, but that's the way I thought about it. But let them, see the exact consequences. So people actually comment, how can you do that? How can you be so nice to those people? Well, there was no need for the contrary. Through the years, too, the Stoics helped me. When I became a supervisor, I kind of came into a small group that had all kinds of turmoil going on. They said one of the guys there used to have shouting matches with the old supervisor, and I really I didn't preach to Stoics to my own employees at all. I often brought a book with me to work, and it would often be Epictetus or Seneca or Aurelius, and a few very bookish coworkers would talk to me, and I would actually talk to them about the Stoics. But mostly it was just trying to give a calm atmosphere. My relationships, of course, the Stoics have helped there. I won't go into that in any depth because I know Greg and Andy are going to deal with that. When I went back for my doctoral degree in psychology after I was working full-time, the Stoics helped me there. When I did a limited amount of psychotherapy, I used mostly Albert Ellis's material and Stoic ideas when I did one-on-one counseling with people. But most of my work was in an Alzheimer's center doing cognitive testing for people to see if they had dementia or not, or if people had different kinds of brain injuries. We also did studies on normal aging, what happens to your memory and reasoning abilities and stuff as you get older. And I didn't think a whole lot about the Stoics at that time. But as I look back on it now, I tell you, the older I get, the more I appreciate Marcus Aurelius. Now, I'm 58 now. I believe I'm as old as he ever got, which was 58. But many of the Stoics talk about being aware that we're going to die someday, right? Keep that in mind. So live while you have the chance here to live on earth. But Aurelius, and maybe the others do, but I don't recall it, but Aurelius in several places says not only that, he says, but be aware you may lose your faculties someday. You may lose your powers of reason while you're still alive. So you've got to make the most of them while you're here. So, to me that was a profound insight. A low light, it really wasn't where the Stoics failed me, it's where I kind of failed the Stoics. As I got close to finishing my doctoral degree in psychology. There's a special program, the state of Illinois set it up for us. A bunch of us, like 30 of us, went through this program at the same time. Many people were already working as psychologists with master's degrees. They wanted to get that doctorate and go on to other things. And, it was very competitive. We were very, very focused about this. I worked the whole time through it. I did it except for the dissertation and internship year. But by the time I was finished, it's like, man, I so focused on the externals. I want to be psychologist. I want to be called doctor. I want that salary that comes with the psychologist position. So the first job I was offered, I took it. Relocated my family. My wife left her job. Took our kids to a different place. I'd really never failed in anything in my life, and it had full of hubris, But I took a job in a developmental center. I had no background in it. When I got there, the place was kind of going through a civil war. They had a new head of psychology, and there were like factions. They thought his new ideas were crazy, and some didn't. And there were so many unreasonable demands. I found that some people were like even fabricating the records. I don't have time to do this therapy with this group of people like I'm supposed to, but I'll put a note about the session. And I could never do that. So it caused me great, moral strain to know I couldn't even, no way I could fake it. So the irony was, I remember one day I was at home, I take a little leave because I was starting into a depressive episode. I opened up my mail, and it was from the licensing board in psychology in Indiana. I went over to Indiana to take my test, and I had the highest score in the state. I set my school's record. But at the same time, I was depressed, and I was trying to figure out how do I get back to my old job that did not require the doctorate degree, and actually did it. Took a voluntary demotion. God, providence works in amazing ways. I was able to get my old job back. My wife got hers back. I got my part-time college teaching back. But I did go through about a 6-month period where I was depressed. I didn't even work out, which that tells you I was genuinely depressed. Thank God, it's the only time since then. But I think that's kind of, I was so busy, I kind of didn't employ those Stoic ideas that used to be so important to me. Better move along. Six years later, I'm 43 years old. I'm reading a line in Seneca. And if you'll excuse my horrible Latin, the line was, nihil minus est humani occupati quam virum, which was translated as, the busy person is least busy with living. I took it like Socrates' idea, the unexamined life was not worth living. I was just doing too much. I had too many tasks, so I was working full-time. I went to school when I mostly worked full-time. I taught college courses part-time, so I cut back a lot. And the next thing I knew, I delved more into the Stoics. I delved into St. Thomas Aquinas. I had like a religious reconversion. I'd been an atheist for 25 years. I found myself being convinced in the reasonableness of God. And within the first year, I wrote the first of 19 books I would then write over the next 15 years. I'd done one book before this time. But Seneca, that was just kind of like the impetus there that got it going. Now, as for my books, I'm going to need to wind down here in just a bit. But I did the one book directly about the Stoics, The Porch and the Cross. Musonius Rufus, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, a brief biography chapter, a brief summary of some of their teachings, and a legacy chapter that looked at how the Christian world took them and other parts of the world took them too. And I was asked recently on the Sunday Stoic podcast, it hasn't aired yet, but somebody wanted to know, when I talked about Stoicism amongst Christian and Catholic audiences, what has the response been? And I had to say, so far, nothing but good. Now, from other things I've written, I know if people think you've made a mistake, or if you actually had, they're often not hesitant to let you know that. And there are certain topics that I know are very, very controversial. When you pull from some like Eastern religions in some Catholic and Christian circles, things like yoga, certain kinds of mindfulness, you'll generate controversy. But in my writings on the Stoic, I have never had a comment. Some of the positive comments, a prominent Catholic author told me he had a friend who was a Protestant in a more fundamentalist denomination that kind of denigrated the value of reason. It was, faith alone. Reason is depraved, And he said that friend told him later he abandoned Christianity and became a Stoic. He said he couldn't understand it. And he said after he read the Porch and the Cross and found, came across the Stoics, he said he understood it now. He understood it now. Because if you think reason is useless, worthless and depraved, and you read the Stoics for the first time, you're probably going to be in for a big surprise. Because reason can go a long way. It can be very noble. It can be very good. Another Catholic priest, a very popular author, gave me an endorsement. First time he read Epictetus, he said, man, he was intrigued by Epictetus. He goes, that is one cool dude. Another man, a deacon emailed me. He wanted to buy a batch of the books for his parishioner. Because he goes, before I read your book, he says, I consider myself, Catholic, but also a minimalist. He said, but after I read your book, I thought, I'm actually more of a Stoic even, than a minimalist. So very, very positive responses there. And again, that's one of the things I love about the Stoics. I loved them when I considered myself an atheist. I loved them no less, when I came back to the Catholic Church. I imagine in this room here, there's a whole variety of religious beliefs or lack of beliefs, people who are secularists or atheists or agnostics. And there's just so much common good there in the Stoics that we can all find different aspects that we can put into use. And it's part of the reason they've had such a profound influence in my life. So, I need to wind down here before I see if you have any questions. I did mention I almost got nervous before a talk. Actually, for two. I almost got nervous today when I walked out there and saw that flat tire. So it wasn't about the talk. It was just about, how am I going to get my car taken care of and get here, But the one was 2 weeks and a day ago, Nashville, Tennessee, at the Grand Ole Opryland Resort, which my wife didn't go with me for that one. I wish she did, because I didn't realize. Has anyone been there? It's like a Disneyland, under one roof. It's a little bit of everything, so she would have done okay. But anyway, it was for the Catholic Medical Association. They had 900 medical doctors and allied people, social workers and nurses and pharmacists and things. And their whole topic was Physician Heal Thyself, Coping with Medical Burnout. And I just sort of a little bit nervous because it wasn't my specialty here. I'm not an MD, I'm a psychologist. But they asked me to do that like a year and a half in advance, so I did my homework, I studied. And I came to find that they talk about three main symptoms involved in professional burnout and especially medical burnout. The first they call emotional exhaustion. You're overwhelmed emotionally, you're drained. The second, a sense of depersonalization. You don't feel connected with yourself, or you see your patient just as a body and not as a person. Or you feel like a robot yourself, they would say. The third is a diminished sense of personal accomplishment. You don't think you're competent anymore. You're not achieving anything worthwhile. So I broke my talk into three parts. I said I'm going to treat mind, body, and soul. And we're doing it in terms of virtues. An intellectual virtue, which was prudence, a practical intellectual virtue. For the body part, a physical virtue, fortitude, which means strength. And I talked about the parallels with mental strength and actual strength training, which they found to be helpful for people who have job stress to make sure you physically exercise. The third component, for accomplishment, I focused on the Christian view of charity or love. The idea these are Catholic doctors. Well, what are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to show love to people by using the best of your skills to help them, then how can you be a failure if that's really what you're aimed at? So anyway, but the first part, emotional exhaustion, is even considered the central component of burnout. Sometimes when they test, that's just the one they test for. And what better way to deal with being emotionally overwhelmed or drained than Stoicism, right? So I threw some Epictetus at them, gave them some what I told you, the cognitive therapy Ellis connection. And then, to try to give them a take-home. Now, I told them I didn't want to give them a prescription because they're medical doctors. That would be very presumptuous for me to do. Was anyone familiar with Steak and Shake restaurants? The little black and white? They have a thing called the take-home sack. It's all one word for your takeout. So I'm going to give you a take-home sack, a practical application. And so you could call this, it's kind of like the negative visualization thing we talked about, or stress inoculation is more of a medically oriented term. Prepare yourself in advance for your stress. So I gave them a line. I said, this comes from a man who had the most stressful occupation perhaps in all of history. His doctor was Galen, one of the founders of medicine, and his profession was that you would be burned out if you lived long enough. His profession, of course, was a Roman emperor, and his name was Marcus Aurelius. And here's what I said that he recommends. He said, say to yourself every morning, today I will encounter the busybody, the thankless, the overbearing, right? The treacherous, the envious, the unneighborly. All this has befallen them because they do not know good from evil. But I, who know the nature of good, that it's beautiful, and evil, that it's ugly, and the nature of the wrongdoer, that it is akin to me. Not as coming from the same blood or the same seed, but as sharing in intelligence and a spark of the divine. I can neither be harmed by them, because nobody else's actions can debase me, nor can I be angry and hate my kinsmen, for we are brought into existence for cooperation, as are the hands and the feet, the eyelids, the upper and lower rows of teeth. So therefore, to act against another is to act contrary to nature. And we act against another when we show resentment or aversion, by lashing out or by turning away. And I kind of suggested, and actually it's an exercise I do myself as often as I can, and I suggested to them they form their own version of that statement for the stresses they're going to encounter in their own day. The patient who saw a commercial is going to tell them what kind of medicine they should be taking, that, whatever it is. And I say, too, in our modern times, all this stuff about the busybody and the treacherous, that still applies, right? You're going to find them. And you're even going to find them before you get to work, because on the way to your job, you're going to have a tailgater. You're going to have that person that drives so slow, they putz through the red light when you're stuck, right? But all this. So anyway, that was the one lesson I tried to give to the doctors, and it seemed that they appreciated the Stoic insights there. So I want to sum up and just say, I've just given you a few of the countless lessons that I've learned from the Stoics. Some I've been able to apply, not perfectly, some I haven't. For my own case now, Stoics talk about like a morning exercise and an evening reflection. Seneca's big on evening reflection. I don't do that because when my head hits the pillow, I'm gone. But I'm a morning person, so I do a morning. One of the things I do, I try to read something from the Stoics themselves and or a modern book. What I'm going through right now is the Daily Stoic, Ryan Holiday's book. Anyone familiar with that one? The topic happens to be something about love, so very appropriate for a talk we have coming up. Yesterday's is very catchy too, because there's even some humor in the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius says, an honest, good person should be like a smelly goat. You know when one is in your presence. So he said, in some versions they say like a person with BO, but this one said smelly goat. I like it. So what a maxim. I want to be like a smelly goat. What does he mean? Not that you should stop using your deodorant, but he said, don't go around saying to tell you the truth, or to be honest, or to be straight with you. He says, just be honest, just be true, so it will show through in your demeanor. So people will know. But anyway, okay. So that's the take-home assignment. Be like a smelly goat. But anyway, I want to thank you. I'll take any questions, and I will say that hopefully I will continue to grow and learn from the Stoics every day for the rest of my life until, as Epictetus puts it, the captain calls for me. So thank you very much. Yes, John.
Hi. I guess I got a question, the value of reason that the Stoics and other philosophies use. What have you learned and what have you found in your own life, the limits of it? And the reason I say that is that, reason is a very good tool, but it's administered by an imperfect being, meaning me.
Yes.
And in almost every situation, we don't know everything that's going to happen. Almost every decision we make is based on semi-incomplete information. So, what's your experience with the value of reason, and how do they talk about it?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. My doctoral school was the Adler School of University, they call it Professional Psychology in Chicago. And Albert Ellis would later say he was an Adlerian. Adler had many ideas that were consistent with the Stoics. And he used to go and people would give him a clinical case. And he would say, here's what he thinks all the dynamics are. But then at the very end he would say, something like es kann alles ganz anders sein. Of course, everything could also be different. And actually, in a written essay once, I used that as my concluding line. Here's my take on this, but of course, maybe everything's also different. But there's that idea, right, we're going to do the best we can with our rational capacity, but we're going to have that sort of the reserve clause. We know we may be wrong. We're going to be open to further correction. Now, coming from from a Catholic position, from Thomas Aquinas, we also take in consideration faith, the idea that faith does not something that conflicts with reason, but possibly God can implant us with things that go beyond our own capacity coming from Him. So for me, I take, say reason, kind of like Ellis's thing, even Albert Ellis's. we shouldn't strive for perfect rationality because we ain't going to get it. We need to be aware that there are limits there, but it is so valuable. It's so valuable to strive to develop it. But again, being open, watching for that feedback to find when you've been mistaken, and then try to grow.
Is that called the reserve clause?
Well, they do use the term reserve clause, but I can't remember if that's the context.
That's a more modern framing of it. It's
Yeah.
saying fate permitting, or
Oh, yes, yeah.
theistic context, God willing.
The good Lord willing, the creek don't rise, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like for your own actions, you're going to say, I'd like to do this, but I don't know for sure if I will, Something may come up that I don't expect. You might get a flat tire or whatever.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Anything else? Favorite color, blue? The velocity of a South African swallow? I don't know.
Favorite power lift?
Favorite power lift? Now this I like. It definitely used to be the squat. The barbell squat. But, I've been doing them since I was like 15 years old. I'm 58 now, I mentioned. So I have some issues when I do either a low or a high bar squat with my lower back, and I had a knee problem for a long, long time. Right now, I found amazing. I can do front squats. Oh, and I feel great. They're very therapeutic on my knees. I keep everything aligned. But bench press I love, but I love overhead press more. Deadlift, I just did them yesterday, and I'm feeling it. So I like that question. But, that's another thing, too, just about training in general. You asked about the power lifts, which is bench press and squat and deadlift. But, of course, now there's so many different ways you can train your body. With strength training exercises, with machines, with the CrossFit type of thing. My friend Pat Flynn is one of the world's experts on kettlebell training. So there's all these things we can do out here to train our bodies. And that's one lesson I actually have employed from the Stoics. I wrote an article called Show Me Your Shoulders, the Stoic workout for the Cite a few years ago, borrowing that line from Epictetus. And he's saying, if I go to an athlete and say, I want to see the results of your training, he says, oh, look at my weights. He says, go to you and your weights. I want to see your shoulders. I want to see what those weights have done for you, So the Stoics have a lot of good insights. Seneca even has a line talking about, he says, there are simple, brief exercises you can do that will wear yourself out in a minimum of a time and then let you get back to more important things. It happens that training Mike Menzer taught me about was called HIIT training, high-intensity training, which is exactly that, designed to be short and brief and leave time in your life to do other things. So it's almost anything you can talk about has a Stoic connection. Did I say this? My book, Fit for Eternal Life, for a Catholic publisher, on the back, it shows 3 books surrounded by a jump rope. The Bible, Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, and Epictetus' Discourses. And I didn't ask him to do it. The publisher happened to be a PhD in philosophy, and they saw that I had cited Epictetus so often, they put it back. So. Yes.
How would you reconcile Stoicism with the Thomistic doctrine of predestination?
Oh, no, that's heavy duty stuff there. The predestination and and I could mess this up. Greg may have much more expertise than me in this, actually. But I think, one way of looking at the predestination would be that God is all-knowing and powerful. I mean, there's no yesterday and today and tomorrow for him. It's all present to him. So there's things that for us are in the future that haven't happened yet, and God would already know that, or with his, in such permissive will allow us to choose one way or another. So the way I see it, in the Stoics, there's a sense of determinism with them too, but there is that realm that our choices enter into the picture and make a difference. So I think that for both the Stoics and Thomas Aquinas, though maybe seeing through, if we could see things through the mind of God, you already know the result. But within our real lives lived, we do have choice. We have free will, and we can make a difference in our lives. Yes.
I think what we read says a lot about us. So I'm just curious, what's your favorite book and why?
Ooh, favorite book and why? See, now that always makes it very, very, very hard for me. Just one. I might say the Summa Theologica, and here's why. If you're familiar, it's Thomas Aquinas' greatest work, 1.5 million words, 3,000 to 4,000 pages. I ordered the Latin English hardcover edition, and the shipping weight was 32 pounds. Okay? Seriously.
Blackfriars one with the facing pages?
Yeah, it's like the Aquinas Institute in Wyoming or something, Blackfriars translation. But yeah, literal, look on Amazon, 32 pounds. And part of the reason I love it so much, though, is that, I love the scripture. I love Aristotle. I once called myself an Aristotelian, Stoic, Albertine Thomist. I have all these influences. But because when you get Aquinas, he wasn't just, I'm thinking this stuff up out of my head. He borrowed, widely from other traditions, and one in particular was Seneca. It's not believed Thomas was well versed in Greek, but of course Seneca wrote in Latin. Thomas cites Seneca when he talks about the passion of anger. What does it mean to get anger? How could it become a vice or a sin? He kind of even tries to reconcile Aristotle and Seneca on anger. He talks about clemency in the context of the virtue of temperance or self-control, in terms of administering a punishment to someone. How do we do that in the right way to show clemency, to try to correct them and not to harm them? He cites Seneca most profusely when talking about the virtue of gratitude, how it relates to justice. He just cites Seneca actually more than Aristotle and more than Agustin and more than the Scriptures. So for that reason, I probably picked the Summa Theologica because it's almost like, an encyclopedia and compendium of other books I would choose. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the letters of Seneca or Epictetus' Handbook, or the Meditations. So he doesn't specifically cite Epictetus and Aurelius. There are many thoughts there that would be consistent. So I love that question, but a very tough one.
Great.
Yes?
I'm a Catholic. I actually work for the Knights of Columbus. Came around the course Stoicism last Sunday. So,
Wow.
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 Where do I start as a Catholic, trying to get into being a Catholic might be able to help me there?
Okay, and I know I'm definitely not the only one. I did this Sunday Stoic podcast with Steve Carafit out in Arkansas and found out that he was a Catholic too. I'm sure there's a lot of Catholics out there. I'd say to get involved in Stoicism itself, if you're in this area, especially, talk to Greg or Dan or these folks and they'll get you connected. As far as, because again, there are multiple Catholics out there doing it. Like I said, my own book, The Porch of the Cross, I kind of give it from a Catholic perspective. I compare Musonius Rufus, some of his statements to sections of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I talk about the influence on St. Thomas Aquinas. I talk about what Greg talked about, the Christianized versions used for monks, for Epictetus' Handbook, things like that. So I'd say there, on a personal level, talk to these folks. And in terms of your reading, if I could be so presumptuous, you might want to look at my Porch and the Cross. But of course, there's also just tons of good books out there now by Stoics. Some of the main people writing are either philosophers or psychologists, and people who are neither. But there's just a wealth of information out there. And if you'd like to talk to me personally, if you get a chance today, please feel free. Yes?
Reincarnation, afterlife, karma. Do you have any comments?
Karma? Well, if you talk at karma in terms of like cause and effect, or in this life, like what goes around comes around and stuff, I think there's a lot of sense there. Personally, I don't. I subscribe more to the Thomistic view of the way the mind and the body relate, and compounding us as one person. And if you didn't have the same body, you really wouldn't be the same soul. You're not just a soul in a body, like the soul. You're an in-souled body. So personally, I don't. And when I come across things in the Stoic that I disagree with, I just say, well, interesting. I'll try to see where they're coming from. But I don't necessarily incorporate that into my worldview, but I take note of it, try to respect it and see where it's coming from.
Well, let's thank our speaker.